Hare Krishna. Welcome to Tax YouTube channel. This is A. Rohan R. Pingle, practicing chartered accountant based in Mumbai, also partner in Motilal and Associates LLP, member firm of Marks Network. Welcome to the video series on what law says. And today we are going to discuss one important case law reported to the High Court in the month of March 26 under the GST law. So let's dive into it. Let me allow to share my screen. Yes. So let's see case citation. So Smruti Waghdhare versus Joint Director, Director General of GST Intelligence, Mumbai and others, Court, Bombay High Court, and Bench Justice G.S. Kulkarni and Justice R.P. Sati. And date of the judgment or order we can see 10th March 2026. Very recent case. Let's understand facts of the case. So the petitioner was engaged in the business of what? Trading in ferrous and non-ferrous metals and scrap. DGGI officers conducted what? Search proceedings at the multiple premises of connected with the petitioner in June 2023. So during the search, what happened was cash aggregating approximately rupees 1 crore was found and seized from the different premises of the client, different premises of the assessor. So the seizure was purportedly undertaken under Section 67 of the CGST Act. So the petitioner challenged the seizure, contending that cash is not liable to seizure under Section 67. There was no legally sustainable reason to believe the seizure orders were arbitrary and without statutory authority. So the petitioner sought release of the seized cash and quashing of the seizure orders. So let's see what were the issues under consideration. So whether GST authorities are empowered under Section 67 subsection 2 of the CGST Act to seize the cash found during the search, then whether the statutory requirement of recording a valid reason to believe existed before exercising the seizure powers, and whether the seizure proceedings complied with mandatory statutory safeguards prescribed under the CGST Act. Very interesting issues. Let's see what are the relevant legal provisions. That is Section 67, subsection 1, subsection 2, then subsection 10, Rule 139 of the CGST rules, then Article 14, Article 21 of the Constitution of India, and Article 300A of the Constitution of India, that is the protection of the property rights. So let's see contentions of the assessee. What assessee contended that Section 67 doesn't specifically authorize what seizure of cash. Cash cannot automatically be treated as goods, documents, books, or things relevant for GST proceedings. No tangible material existed to justify what the formation of reason to believe. Then the statutory precondition for seizure was absent. Search and seizure powers, being drastic powers, require strict interpretation. Retention of cash without authority violates what? Constitutional protections and property rights. And the action was arbitrary, excessive, and beyond the powers of conferred under the CGST Act, is what contended by the assessee. Let's see what revenue contended. The seized cash was allegedly linked with what? Suspected GST evasion. Cash constituted a thing within the meaning of Section 67, subsection 2 is what one of the contentions of the revenue. Then authorities possessed sufficient information justifying what search and seizure. Investigation was ongoing and therefore retention of cash was what? Necessary, is what also contended by the revenue. And search proceedings were conducted pursuant to the powers vested under the CGST Act. So these were the contentions of the revenue. Now let's see what High Court observed and held. First, reason to believe is a what? Mandatory jurisdictional requirement. So the court held that reason to believe is not a mere formality. It is a foundational safeguard against the arbitrary exercise of the power. Such belief must be based on what? Objective and relevant material. The formation of the belief must have a rational nexus with the action proposed. Then search powers must be what? Strictly constituted. Under that, search and seizure provisions invade what? Privacy and property rights. So therefore, these provisions require what? Strict compliance. And any deviation from the statutory safeguards renders what? The action vulnerable. Then 67, section 67 doesn't authorize what? Seizure of the cash. Very important. What section 67 is what High Court observed is that it doesn't authorize to seize the cash. So court examine the language of the section 67 subsection 2. The provision permits seizure of what? Goods liable for confiscation, documents, books, things useful or relevant for proceedings. But here revenue content that is what cash is thing. But let's see what court now observes. The court held that the provision doesn't expressly authorize the seizure of the cash merely because cash is found during the search is what court observed. So absence of what? Valid statutory satisfaction. So seizure orders fail to demonstrate what? The proper statutory satisfaction. There was no material indicating that the cash itself was relevant to the proceedings under the Act. So action held arbitrary and without authority of laws. Under that, the court characterized the seizure as arbitrary and legally unsustainable. Exercise of the statutory power without satisfying the statutory conditions was held impermissible. And final directions of the High Court, where the seizure orders were quashed and authorities were directed to release and return the seized cash to the petitioner. So, what principle laid down by this case? Reason to believe is a mandatory jurisdictional condition and not an empty formality. That is the foremost principle we can say laid down by this case. So, search and seizure provisions under GST must be interpreted very much strictly. GST officers cannot assume powers not expressly granted by the statute. And cash cannot be seized under Section 67 merely because it is discovered during the search process. So administrative convenience cannot override what? Statutory limitations. Constitutional protection against the arbitrary deprivation of the property remains available even in the tax proceedings also. And procedural safeguards are integral to the validity of the search proceedings. So, while concluding this session, we can conclude that this judgment is a landmark ruling on GST search and seizure powers and reaffirms that the coercive powers under the GST Act from the department non unfettered and that absence of a legally sustainable reason to believe can invalidate the entire search and seizure action and we can proceedings void ab initio. So that's it from today. Thank you so much for patient hearing. If you have any questions, observations, suggestions, then do let me know via WhatsApp, email, or you can also comment below the video. Hope you are gaining valuable knowledge from all these updates and video series which we are conducting on a Tax YouTube channel. So stay tuned to the Tax YouTube channel. If you are not yet subscribed, then do subscribe and also share this video in your network. Thank you so much once again. Bye bye. Take care. See you soon. Hare Krishna.